Picture the finest pair of riding boots you've ever seen. Not shoes, boots. Gentlemen's boots, calf leather, hand-stitched, polished to a depth that makes them look less like an object and more like a decision about what the colour brown is supposed to mean. The kind that sit in a bow window on the Strand, lit by gas lamps that make everything inside the glass look warmer than the street outside. The kind that cost more than a working man earns in a month, and are priced that way not to exclude but to announce. Quality, the arrangement says, craftsmanship, materials of the highest order. Now look at that leather. Feel it in your imagination. Smooth, supple, almost like skin. The sort of suppleness that doesn't come from the hide itself. A raw hide is stiff as board and smells of blood and animal, and the essential unpleasantness of what things are made of before we make them into what we want. To take something like that and turn it into what's in the window, you need chemistry. And the chemistry of Victorian leather begins in a place that the gentleman who buys those boots has never once, in the history of his gentlemanhood, been asked to consider. It begins on the streets of Bermondsey, on a Tuesday morning in March 1860, with a bucket and a scraper and a 15-year-old boy named Will Fletcher, who came to London from Maidstone, Kent, 7 months ago, with 3 shillings and the address of a cousin who had since moved to Manchester. The work Will does is called pure finding. Pure is the Victorian street slang for dog excrement, specifically the dried, white, high alkaline variety, the biological end product of London's estimated 100,000 dogs, collected off the street and sold to the tanning yards of Bermondsey, where it is used in a process called baiting. Baiting softens the hide before it enters the tan pit. Without baiting, the leather is stiff and inferior. Without baiting, there are no riding boots in the window on the Strand. Without Will, Fletcher, and the several hundred people like him walking the streets of this city every morning with their buckets, the Victorian leather industry does not function. Henry Mayhew sat down with pure finders in 1850 and wrote down exactly what they earned and how they worked, and what their lives were like. He was one of the only people who thought they were worth writing about. The result was a chapter in his enormous survey of London street workers, London labour, and the London poor, which was read by people in drawing rooms who could afford books, while the pure finders themselves went on working the streets. I make these history stories. I genuinely have no idea whether you're listening to fall asleep, or whether you're one of those people who finds the grimmer corners of the past oddly comforting. The solid knowledge that whatever happened in your day, at least you didn't spend it carrying a bucket through 19th century Bermondsey. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Will Fletcher. You're 15 years old. You came to London 7 months ago from Maidstone, Kent, with 3 shillings, a change of clothes, and a letter of introduction to a cousin who turned out to have moved to Manchester 2 years prior. You didn't know that when you arrived. You know it now. This morning, in the grey pre-dawn light of a Tuesday in March 1860, you are standing in the middle of a side street in Bermondsey, holding your bucket, staring at a woman who is not supposed to be here. Her name is Agnes Perce. She's 40-something, built like a piece of furniture, with arms that look like they could bend iron. She's been working this stretch of Grange Road for 15 years. You've been working it for 3 months. There's been an understanding. You take the upper section, Grange Road to Long Lane. She takes the lower section, Long Lane down to the tannery approach. That was the arrangement. This morning, Agnes is standing in your section, bucket in hand, scraper already working. She hasn't looked up. She knows you're there. The sound of the iron scraper on wet cobblestone is the only answer she gives you. Agnes, your voice comes out smaller than you intended. We had an arrangement. Now she looks up. Her face is broad and weathered, the colour of old brick, and her expression is the expression of a woman who has heard many things and been moved by none of them. Arrangement, she repeats, flat, not as a question. Yes. She goes back to work. Your stomach is tight, not with fear exactly, with the particular kind of helplessness that comes from having no leverage. You have nothing Agnes Peirce wants or needs. You're 15 years old and she's been doing this since before you were born, and whatever informal code governs the territory of pure finding in Bermondsey, you're not yet senior enough for it to protect you. You want to argue, but Agnes has £25 on you and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you stand in the world. And in this world, she stands ahead of you. You could make your case, she would not hear it. Push or move on. The Grange Road section is not the only territory in Bermondsey. It is just the best one. Good density of foot traffic, which means good density of dog traffic, which means good density of pure. But the streets around St George's Churchyard have potential. Further up, near the Borough Market, there is always activity. You move on. You don't say anything else to Agnes Peirce. She does not acknowledge your leaving. This is how your day begins. Before we go further, I want to make sure you understand what you're carrying. The bucket is wooden, reinforced with a metal hoop, approximately the size of a large milk pail. There is a scraper, a flat piece of iron on a short handle, tucked under your arm. There are gloves, or what used to be gloves, now worn down to something more like mittens, with ambitions. The leather is cracked at the knuckles. In the cold March air, your knuckle joints feel it, a dry, persistent sting at every bend of the finger. And there is the smell. You can't smell yourself anymore. That happened about 2 weeks into the work. Some merciful adaptation of the human nose. The people you pass in the street can smell you. You can see it in their faces sometimes. A flicker, a slight recoil, the careful expansion of distance. A woman pulling her skirts aside on a narrow pavement, not looking at you but making sure you understand she is not looking at you. You were bothered by it at first. Now you walk through it. The March cold helps, a little. Cold keeps the smells tamped down. The truly terrible months are July and August, when Bermondsey in the afternoon heat is something that needs to be experienced to be believed, and once believed, immediately disbelieved, because the mind refuses to fully accept that human civilization can produce something quite that bad. The tan pits, the glue boilers, the gut spinners, the greaseworks, the river at low tide, all of it amplified by heat until the air itself seems to require an apology. But that is summer. This is March. Your breath comes out in small clouds. The cobblestones are slick with last night's rain. The city is waking up around you, the enormous slow machinery of it grinding into motion. Brewery carts, the distant clanging of something industrial, a dog somewhere barking at nothing, or at everything, which in Bermondsey amounts to the same thing. Bermondsey in 1860 is the smell before it is anything else. Not just the tanneries, though they account for most of it. There are also the glue factories, horse glue, leather scraps boiled down into a thick amber substance used by furniture makers across the city. The fellmongers, who process fleeces and raw hides before they reach the tanners. The gut spinners, who make strings for musical instruments and tennis rackets out of sheep intestine. which is itself a sentence that could occupy your imagination for a while, the grease boilers, and underneath all of it the Thames at low tide, which has its own contribution to make. The Thames at low tide in 1860 is not a neutral presence. The Metropolitan Board of Works is currently in the process of addressing this. Joseph Bazalgette designing the great intercepting sewers that will, when finished, change the smell of London forever. But they are not finished yet. The great stink was 2 years ago. The summer of 1858, when the Thames smelled so badly that Parliament was forced to close its riverside windows and hang the curtains with chloride of lime just to function. They talk about it still, the people who remember it. The summer the river won. If you stood on the roof of one of the tannery buildings and looked north, you would see the dome of St. Paul's floating above the haze like a dream of something cleaner. The dome Wren built after the Great Fire, visible from almost any point in the city, which was deliberate. He designed it that way. A vertical anchor for a city that needs something to look up at, and if you looked down you would see Bermondsey. The tan pits sunk into the earth between low brick buildings, filled with the dark brown liquor, oak bark and water and months of chemistry that nobody in 1860 fully understands. They just know it works, has worked for 400 years. The hides hanging in long rows in the drying sheds, the men wading through the pits with long poles, moving the hides through the liquor in the slow rhythm of work that becomes, over time, less a deliberate action and more a bodily habit. The tanners have the strongest hands of any tradesman in London, working in wet hides, cold water, alkaline solutions. After 20 years, their hands look like the product they spend their lives making. Brown, hardened, permanently waterlogged at the grain. They earn a good wage for the period. Their work is hard and the conditions are genuinely unpleasant in ways that would concern a modern health inspector. But it is skilled work, recognised work, the work of men with a craft and a guild. You bring them the raw material that makes their craft possible. You are not a tanner. You're not in any official sense of the Victorian economy anything at all. There is no guild for pure finders, no worshipful company of, well, you understand, no society, no union, no organised anything. You're a free agent in the most literal sense, free to work, free to not eat if you don't work, free to have your territory taken by Agnes Purse on a Tuesday morning with no recourse and no remedy. Bermondsey was already old when the Normans arrived. The monks at Bermondsey Abbey were curing hides here in the 12th century. The name itself comes from the Old English. Bermondsey, which is Bormon's Island, a raised area of ground above the riverside marshes. The monks are gone, the abbey, dissolved by Henry VIII in 1537. But the leather trade never left. It only grew. Everything that required leather in Victorian England required Bermondsey. The army's boots and belts and harnesses, the navy's, the railways, which use leather in a dozen applications, from the seat cushions in first class to the washers in the steam fittings. The furniture trade, the bookbinders, every gentleman's shoes, every lady's bag, the whips that keep the horses moving, the collars on the very dogs whose leavings you are this morning collecting in your bucket. There is a circularity to this that you have thought about. Lying awake in your cellar room at night, the dogs whose waste you collect are wearing leather collars made from leather that was processed using the waste of other dogs. You noticed this on a cold night about 2 months ago, and it seemed funny then, and now it just seems like the way things are. Everything in the city is connected to everything else, and most of the connections are things the people at the comfortable end of the chain would prefer not to think about. Your bucket is still mostly empty. It is early yet. The streets of Bermondsey on a Tuesday morning are filling up quickly now, the way the tide fills a harbour. First a trickle of workers heading to the early shift at the tanneries, then more, then a stream. A crossing sweeper, a boy about 10, younger than you, thin as wire, with a broom half his height, is already at his corner of Long Lane. He pushes horse manure to the sides with practiced strokes, creating a cleaner path for respectable pedestrians who will pay him a halfpenny to cross without soiling their shoes. His job is to create the conditions for a transaction. The transaction is the right to cross a street without stepping in what horses leave behind. A penny for that right, or a halfpenny if you negotiate, which most people do because negotiating even over a halfpenny is a habit the Victorian economy instills. He glances at you as you pass, not with contempt, not with warmth, with the simple recognition of a fellow worker at the lower end of things. You nod. He goes back to his sweeping. The first deposit of the morning is near the churchyard wall of St Mary Magdalene's, where someone's dog apparently had strong opinions about Victorian architecture. It is good quality. You can tell at a glance. Pale, dry, the March cold has dried it overnight. The alkalinity has developed properly. The tanners call this the white stuff, though it is more of a greyish cream. The colour of old bone. This is what you want. You set the bucket down and take out the scraper. The motion is practiced now. It wasn't when you started. Your first week, the scraper felt wrong in your hand, the motion awkward, and you had to stop repeatedly, bent double, trying to approach it mechanically. This is just a job. This is just a task. It means nothing more than mucking out a stable, which you have done, or digging turnips, which you have also done. The mind is creative in its objections, though. It finds angles you hadn't considered. Now 7 months in, your hands know the motion without instruction. The angle of the scraper matters. Too steep and you lose material. Too shallow and you pick up grit and mud that contaminates the batch and reduces the quality, which reduces the price, which is the end of a chain of events that begins with the angle of a scraper on a wet cobblestone. Everything matters. Everything connects. The scraping sound on cobblestone is high and slightly metallic. You have stopped hearing it consciously. Like all constant sounds, it has become part of the background of your life, the way the sound of the river became background for the waterman, or the sound of the loom for a weaver. Your work writes itself into your senses until it is simply the texture of being awake. 3 deposits in quick succession near the churchyard wall. Some dog was busy last night. Your bucket is a quarter, full. The weight has begun to register in your right shoulder. £15 roughly when the bucket is full, hanging off your arm at a slightly awkward angle, because you haven't yet bought the yoke that Martha uses and that would distribute the weight properly across both shoulders. The yoke costs 6pence. 6pence is 3 days' food money. You've been meaning to buy the yoke for 6 weeks. A woman passes with a child, the child looking at you with the open curiosity of someone who does not yet understand that looking is rude. The mother pulls him along without looking at you at all. She's wearing a blue wool coat that has seen better days, but is still a coat, real wool with real buttons. The child has shoes. You think about Maidstone, about your mother. She's in the workhouse now, has been since 6 months before you left. The parish workhouse on Union Street. You have sent her 2 shillings since you arrived in London. 2 shillings in 7 months, which is not much, but it is 2 shillings more than you had when you started. You do not think about Maidstone for long. It does not help. The next street is Leather Market Street, named predictably for the leather market that has operated here since the 18th century. On Mondays and Thursdays the market opens and the hide merchants come to buy and sell and inspect samples and argue about prices in the particular register of men who are arguing about money, but doing it politely. Today is Tuesday, so the market is quiet. The low brick building closed. The smell of hides drifting out around the doors anyway, because some smells are not really stored inside buildings. They live in the walls. You know this street well. It is productive. The area around the market attracts dogs. Something in the combination of aromas communicates something interesting to the dog brain. You are not a naturalist. You do not know why. You just know that where the hides are, dogs tend to congregate, and where dogs congregate, you work. This is the practical knowledge of your trade. 4 more deposits along Leather Market Street. 2 good quality, 1 acceptable, 1 you leave, 2 wet, 2 dark, the colour of mud rather than chalk, not worth the weight it would add to the bucket. This quality judgment is what separates a competent pure finder from one who wastes their time. Old Martha explained it to you on your 3rd day. Martha, full name Martha Briggs, 63 years old, widow, been doing this since her husband died in 1841. Found you standing uncertain over a puddle of dubious material, scraper in hand, unsure whether to bother. "Leave that," she said. She had not even looked at it closely. She had looked at it the way an experienced surgeon looks at a patient, briefly, efficiently, the conclusion already forming in the first glance. How can you tell? Colour, texture, the way it sits on the stone. She pointed with her own scraper. That's wet through, rained on twice. Won't bind right in the liquor, Doyle will know. Doyle being Mr. Michael Doyle, the tanner's man at the Bermondsey Hide and Skin Company on Tanner Street, which is where you sell your collection each morning. He can tell just by looking? He can tell by looking and smelling and 30 years of doing it. Martha gave you a look that was not unkind, but was not particularly gentle either. After that long, he can tell by the general impression standing in the doorway. Don't bring him rubbish. He'll remember, and next time he'll weigh your bucket twice as careful and find fault twice as quick. Martha Briggs is not technically your mentor. You do not have a mentor. Nobody in this line of work has a mentor. There is no apprenticeship indenture, no formal instruction, no worshipful company of anything. But Martha has answered your questions on the handful of occasions when you ask them, which is the closest thing available. She works a different territory than the streets around the Borough Market north of here. You see her most mornings at the tannery, arriving at approximately the same time, exchanging the brief nod of people who know each other without being friends. She's the most senior pure finder operating in Bermondsey that you know of. Her estimates of her own career vary depending on her mood. When I started, she told you once, there were no railways. A pause. Think about that. You think about it now, scraping along the base of a brick wall, while somewhere in the distance a locomotive announces itself on the viaduct above Bermondsey with a metallic shriek, then the deeper rumble of the cars, then silence. No railways when Martha started. The whole world has been remade since then, and Martha Briggs has been walking these streets the whole time, bucket in hand, watching the transformation, unchanged herself in the ways that matter. The scraper, the bucket, the route, the morning cold, the calculation at the gate. Let me be precise about the money. because precision matters when the margins are this thin. A bucket of good quality pure, white, alkaline, well-dried, sells to the tanner's man for 3p to 4p, depending on quality and current demand. A very full bucket, very good quality, exceptional day, might bring 5p. On a productive morning, you might fill 2 buckets. On a very good day, summer, dry weather, high dog traffic, 3 buckets is possible. That is maybe 10p, 12 if you're lucky. A shilling is 12p. So a good day's work, which means covering several miles of streets from before dawn until early afternoon, brings you roughly 1 shilling. A bad day brings you 6p, or less. Rent for your cellar room on Horsley Street, a room shared with 2 other men, one of whom works at the tannery, and the other of whom does something at the docks that he has not specified, is 4 shillings a week. Divided 3 ways, that is 16p per week, which is slightly over a shilling. Bread is a penny a loaf. A small piece of hard cheese is a halfpenny. Cooked meat from the cook shop, when you can afford it, is 2p for a portion. You need to earn at least 2 and 6p a week to cover food and rent. That means filling your bucket twice a day, every day, 5 or 6 days a week. In summer, this is uncomfortable but achievable. In March, with the rain reducing quality and quantity, it is something you manage by eating less. There are people lower than you in the hierarchy of street labour. The mudlarks who wade in the Thames mud at low tide, picking up fragments of coal and iron and rope, and anything the river deposits. Their earnings are higher on good days and nothing on bad ones, and their feet are in permanent contact with material that makes your bucket seem hygienic. The toshers who work the sewers, the bone grubbers sorting rubbish heaps, the resurrection men who do not discuss their work in daylight. The street. Labour economy of Victorian London has a precision to it that is never officially acknowledged. There is no master chart, no guild system, no recognised hierarchy. But everyone in it knows exactly where they stand. You are 3 months into pure finding. You have a regular selling relationship with Mr. Doyle at the Bermondsey Hide and Skin Company. You know your territory mostly. You're beginning to understand the quality judgments, the route strategy, the physics of the bucket carry. You are not at the bottom. But this morning, with an empty bucket and Agnes Percy's dismissal still fresh, it does not feel that way. You turn onto Weston Street and almost immediately see something that makes you stop. There is a gentleman standing in the middle of the road. Not unusual in itself. Gentlemen exist in Bermondsey, though they are not common. They come to inspect the leather market, or to visit the tannery owners, who are often prosperous men in their own right, men who live north of the river in respectable addresses and travel by omnibus to manage their yards. What is unusual about this particular gentleman is that he has dropped his cane. The cane has landed in something unfortunate, and he is looking at it with the expression of a man contemplating a fundamental philosophical problem. The cane is mahogany, silver-topped, expensive. The thing it has landed in is your business. He looks up as you approach. You can see the calculation in his eyes. You have the bucket, the scraper, the general appearance of someone who does this work. You are exactly what he needs, in the most awkward possible sense. "Boy," he says. You stop. "Sir?" He gestures at the cane. This is apparently as much communication as he is prepared to engage in. You set your bucket down. You pick up the cane. You clean it against the inside of your bucket, which is, after all, partly what the bucket is for, and hand it back. He takes it with 2 fingers quickly, as if contamination might travel through the wood. He reaches into his coat and produces a coin. He holds it out without looking at you directly. A penny. You take it. You nod. He says nothing. He walks away at a pace that is not quite hurrying, but is definitely moving with purpose. His coat is good wool. His hat is beaver felt. You can tell by the sheen. His boots are the kind you saw last week in a shop window on the Strand when you went that far north on an errand. Calf leather, polished, supple. Those boots, in all probability, contain a small chemical contribution from this very street. You do not know whether to find this funny or bleak. Both, perhaps. You go back to your bucket. The penny means your morning is slightly better than it seemed. 1 penny doesn't change the arithmetic, but it changes something less calculable. A small adjustment in the ledger of dignity, which street workers track with a precision that is never acknowledged and never spoken aloud. You were useful, he paid, he did not argue. That is the entirety of what you represent in his world. A penny's worth of assistance. You think about your father briefly. Edward Fletcher, farmhand, died of fever in October 1858. He was 41 years old. He worked his entire adult life on other men's land, earning wages that never quite added up to enough in service of an agricultural economy that treated the labour of men like him as an inconvenient necessity rather than a value in itself. He died with 6 shillings, a worn Bible, and a collection of small debts. He was not a failure by any measure that counts things correctly. He fed his family. He worked hard and honestly and without complaint. But the economy did not care about any of that. You stop thinking about your father. It does not help. You go back to work. By 9 o'clock, you have covered 4 streets, and your bucket is 3/4 full. Normally at 3/4, you push for a complete bucket before going to the tannery, but this morning's material has been less consistent than you would like. The first section was excellent, the middle section acceptable, but Weston Street has yielded some material you're not entirely happy with. Wetter than ideal, a few pieces more brown than white, the colour that tells you the process has not developed far enough. Doyle will notice. You debate with yourself. Go now, with 3/4 of a bucket of mixed quality, and risk a lower price or a rejection. Or continue working, seek better material, improve the average quality of what you have, and accept the extra time. Time is not nothing. Every extra hour on the street is an hour you're not resting or eating, or doing the small maintenance tasks that keep a person functional. Your feet, at the end of a long day, have begun to develop their own opinions about your life choices. But 3/4 of a bucket of mediocre material will get you 2pence. A full bucket of good material will get you 4p. The difference of 2p is, on days when you're eating close to the margin, actually significant. You keep working. The streets north of Bermondsey proper, up toward Newington and the Borough, are territory you visit occasionally but do not own. Agnes Purse works some of them. Other finders work the rest. The informal geography of pure finding covers the same ground as the dog-walking geography of the neighbourhood, which tracks roughly to population density and oddly to wealth. Here is something that surprised you when you first understood it. The more prosperous the neighbourhood, the more useful the dogs, not because the dogs are better, but because the dogs of prosperous households are better fed. Better fed dogs produce waste with a higher protein content, which decomposes more efficiently into the high alkaline material tanners need. The dogs of Bermondsey itself, the dogs of the tannery workers, and the factory hands and the dock labourers are mongrels fed on scraps producing output that is more variable in quality. The dogs of the wealthier streets north and west, Newington, Kennington toward Lambeth, are often purebreds, fed on cooked meat, producing waste that is, from the tanner's perspective, measurably superior. The absurdity of this fact has not escaped you. The wealthy areas also have more resistance to people like you. Servants on those streets will sometimes shout. One morning 3 weeks ago you came within range of a footman who had opinions about street people in his employer's road, and the opinions were delivered at volume and involved a broom. You retreated. Some territories are theoretically productive and practically inaccessible. Today you compromise. You work the edges of the borough, streets that border the wealthy without quite being wealthy themselves, territory that no one you know is actively claiming. You find a good run of deposits near the wall of a school building on a side street off the borough high street. Pale grey-white, dry in the March cold, well-formed, exactly what Doyle is looking for. The morning has turned around. By 10 o'clock your bucket is at capacity. The average quality is acceptable. The weight has settled into your shoulder like a decision you have made and will now have to live with for the walk to the tannery. The approach to the Bermondsey Hide and Skin Company on Tanner Street is, in terms of sensory experience, something you no longer register consciously, but have never actually stopped experiencing. The smell precedes the building by at least 200 yards. Not the smell of what you are carrying, though that is there, at the base, familiar as your own breath by now. The smell of the process itself, the soak pits, the hides in various stages, the lime pits where the hair is loosened, the tan liquor, dark brown and oddly thick, filling the working pits to knee depth. If you were to try to describe it to someone who had never encountered it, you might start with something earthy, oak bark, soil after rain. Then you would add animal, the deep fundamental smell of large mammals processed in bulk. Then you would add the sharper notes, ammonia, alkalinity, the chemical edge of something biological doing its work. Then you would run out of words. Some smells operate on older parts of the brain than language. They are just known. You know this one the way you know the smell of your own room, the smell of your childhood home in Maidstone, the smell of your father's work clothes at the end of a harvest day. Part of the permanent furniture of your sensory world. You carry your bucket through the gates of the tannery yard. The yard is approximately 40 feet square. On 3 sides, low brick buildings house the work areas. On the 4th side, the gate you just came through, and beside it the small office where Doyle sits. 2 other finders are ahead of you. One is a woman you do not know, older than Martha, carrying a bucket in each hand. 2 buckets, which means either a very good morning or a very long one. The other is a man known to everyone simply as Sid, who works the borough market streets, and has been doing this longer than you have been alive. Sid is missing the last 2 fingers of his right hand from some earlier occupation he does not discuss. He carries his bucket with a hooking motion, the handle lodged in the crook of his elbow. You have been studying this technique for 3 weeks. They do not acknowledge you. You do not acknowledge them. This is standard. Doyle appears from the office. Michael Doyle is 55 years old, Irish, compact, with a face that was probably handsome once and is now just weathered. He has been the buyer at the Bermondsey Hide and Skin Company for 18 years. He has seen everything and is impressed by nothing. He keeps a ledger. He does not discuss prices. He states them. He looks at your bucket, doesn't touch it yet. He is doing something you cannot quite articulate. Reading the bucket. Processing variables invisible to you. Full? He asks. Yes, sir. Turn it. You tilt the bucket slowly toward him. He crouches, looking at the consistency. A pause. Mixed, he says. Middle section's wet. Good run this morning near the borough. The outer sections are excellent. He stands back up. His eyes are a clear, surprisingly light grey. Tuppence halfpenny. Threepence, you say. Tuppence halfpenny. Middle's wet. The borough material is the best I've brought you this week. Top third is threepence. He says it as an acknowledgement that you have said the word twice, and he has heard it both times. He goes back inside. He returns with 3 pennies, places them in your hand. 3 pennies, not 4, not the tuppence halfpenny he opened with. You got a halfpenny more than his first offer. That halfpenny represents approximately 45 minutes of additional walking this morning. The time spent in the borough streets improving your average quality. The calculation is accurate even when it is deflating. You put the coins in your inside pocket in the small worn leather pouch. Yes, leather, the irony of which has occurred to you repeatedly, and carry your empty bucket back out of the yard. You've been inside the tanning sheds exactly once. It was in your first week when Doyle needed someone to carry a message to the foreman, and the errand boy was absent. You've not been invited back in, but you remember it. The tan pits are sunk about 4 feet into the ground, filled with the dark liquor. In each pit, hides are suspended, moving slowly through the solution. The process from raw hide to finished leather takes months, sometimes longer. The men who work the pits use long poles to move the hides, a motion somewhere between stirring and lifting, repeated all day. Their arms are enormous from this. Their lower bodies are permanently wet, the waders failing against the liquor over time. They are called pit men. They earn a craftsman's wage. After the pits, the hides go to the beam. The beamsmen work over a large rounded block, pressing and scraping the leather to even the texture, remove remaining grain, stretch the fibres. The sound of the beam is a particular rhythm. A long controlled stroke, a pause, another stroke, that you can hear from the yard on quiet mornings, then drying, then finishing. Then onto the curriers, who are separate craftsmen, working oils into the leather until it achieves the final suppleness that makes it what it is. 6 months, from raw hide to finished leather. The hides in the pits today were started in autumn. Autumn turned to winter while they soaked. The leather being finished this week was started when the leaves were changing. And somewhere in the middle of this long process, the baiting step. After the lime pit, after the hair has been scraped away, the hide is softened at a cellular level. The fibres need to relax before the tan liquor can do its work properly. And this is where what you collect becomes relevant. The baiting vat, a large wooden tub filled with the solution made from your bucket's contents and water. The hide goes in. Something in the material, something nobody in 1860 has named correctly, though they will in time, when the science of enzymes is developed. Something breaks down the fibre structure, making the leather receptive. Without baiting, leather is stiff and brittle. It will crack under use. The final product is inferior. With baiting properly done, leather becomes what is in the window on the Strand. The beamsman you saw in the doorway, with the forearms like ship rope and the assessing eyes, he would not exist professionally without the network of people walking the streets of London every morning with their buckets. The connection is real, chemical, physical. It is just not acknowledged. You're not invisible to Doyle. but you are invisible to the process. Your name does not appear in the account of how leather is made. You appear in his ledger as a line entry, a cost, not contributor. The boots go into the world and no one asks. You find Martha at the rinse trough arriving as you are leaving. Her buckets look full, and even to your developing eye the quality is excellent. White, dry, uniform. Quality, you ask. She tips one for you to look at. North side of the borough, she says. Near the park, gentlemen's dogs. Of course, parks. Wealthy families walking wealthy dogs in spaces maintained for exactly this kind of gentle morning activity. I don't know that territory, you say. You do now. She does not look at you while she says this. North gate of Bermondsey Street. Up to the borough. Left past the Church of St. George. Past the fields. Morning walk time is 7 to 9. Late afternoon is 4 to 6. Between these times, less productive. This is the most information Martha has ever volunteered at once. You receive it carefully. Why are you telling me this? She looks up. Because Agnes Peirce took your section this morning. I saw. You saw. I see most things. She picks up her buckets. Agnes gets greedy every few months. She'll overextend. By Thursday you'll have your section back. Until then the park dogs will do you. She walks toward the office, 2 full buckets, the walk of a woman who knows exactly where she's going. You stand at the rinse trough for a moment. Martha Briggs has been doing this since before the railways, and she just gave you a route. For no reason you can identify other than that Agnes Peirce is getting on her nerves and displacing you in the direction of better territory, solves a problem she was already thinking about. Or she just felt like it. Some kindnesses in London do not require elaborate explanation. They happen the way weather happens, not because anyone decided it should, but because the conditions were right. You eat a piece of bread from your coat pocket. Standing up, leaning against the tannery wall, the bread is this morning's purchase from the bakehouse on Horsley Street. A penny for a small loaf, still slightly warm when you bought it. Not warm now, dense and filling, and you chew slowly because you have learned that slow chewing does approximately 2/3 of what it is supposed to do in terms of convincing your stomach it has received more than it has. Your feet ache. You have been on them since before dawn, walking 3 miles minimum already. The cobblestones of Bermondsey are not gentle. They are old cobblestones, Victorian old, which means they have been settling unevenly for decades, creating a surface that is technically solid, but practically a series of small experiments in ankle management. Your right boot has a gap in the sole, beginning at the ball of the foot. In wet weather it lets in water. You have 3p set aside for the cobbler, which has been 3p set aside for 3 weeks. You push off the wall and start north. The streets shift as you move north from Bermondsey. Not dramatically. The Victorian city changes gradually, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, like a geological formation. You can always tell where you are by the aggregate signal of small things, the state of the paving, the height of the buildings, the quality of people's clothes, the presence or absence of trees, the frequency of constables. In Bermondsey, a constable walking his beat might nod at you. He knows what you are. He sees you every day. You're part of the landscape. The closer you get to the borough, the more you become a question mark in the street's social imagination. Someone from elsewhere. Purpose unclear. You keep your head down. Past St. George the Martyr's on the corner, a large church that blocks the early morning light. Past the coaching inns along the Borough High Street, still busy even now, their yards full of activity, the smell of hay and horse, which is a relief from your own smell, however brief. And then the streets change again. The pavement is cleaner, the buildings better maintained, the windows curtained rather than boarded. Children here are dressed, not just clothed. People have employed servants, which means someone keeps the street outside the house in acceptable condition. The dogs here are different. A woman walks past with a large reddish-brown dog on a leather lead. The dog is well brushed, well fed, the kind of dog that sleeps indoors. The woman is wearing good quality wool, high-buttoned boots, a hat that signals income without being ostentatious. She looks at your bucket and then at you. Her expression is not aggressive. It is somewhere between unease and sympathy, and a strong preference for you to be in a different part of her visual field. You nod. She looks away. The dog, for its part, is interested in you. It has the honest enthusiasm of an animal that has no opinions about your work, only opinions about whether you are interesting. You are apparently interesting. Its tail works back and forth. You carry on. Martha was right about the park. The small green area north of Bermondsey Street has exactly what she promised. The morning walk traffic has been through since 7, and the evidence is there. Distributed along the paths and under the trees. Good quality, almost uniformly. The diet of Bermondsey gentlemen's dogs is clearly superior to the diet of Bermondsey working families' dogs, and the proof is right here, at the specific, undeniable, chemical level of your bucket. A gentleman on a bench reads a newspaper, taking his morning air before the day's business. He glances at you once, looks back at the paper. He is practicing the Victorian skill of looking directly at something and not seeing it, which is a talent developed specifically for navigating the discomfort of daily proximity to poverty and necessary unpleasantness. You're doing necessary work. His boots are evidence of this, but the chain of thought leads somewhere uncomfortable, and so the newspaper is more interesting. You take your bucket, 3/4 full of the best material you have collected all day, and start back toward Bermondsey. Your afternoon is looking considerably better than your morning. The weight of a full bucket is approximately 15 pounds. You have never weighed it precisely. The estimate comes from the approximate volume and density, and from the way it feels in your arm by the time you've been carrying it for 2 hours. The bucket must be carried level. If you tilt it, it sloshes, a lesson obvious in retrospect and not at all obvious when you started, in the way all practical knowledge is not obvious until it is. Walking level requires a particular gait, measured, controlled at the hip. The Victorian working body, you've come to understand, is shaped by its work in ways that go beyond what the body chose or expected. The pit men have their enormous forearms. The dock workers have their forward lean. You have a right shoulder that will be notably stronger than the left for the rest of your life. You have noticed that Sid carries his bucket with a hooking motion, the handle lodged in the crook of his elbow rather than gripped. This takes the strain off the hand and distributes it through the forearm and upper arm. He never told you about this technique. You observed it. 3 weeks ago, you tried it. Your forearm ached for 2 days in a new and educational way. Now it is becoming natural. These are the micro-inheritances of the trade. The techniques passed not through formal instruction, but through observation. The way guild apprentices once learned by watching, but without the guild, without the formality, without the protection. Martha carries 2 buckets. The yoke across her shoulders, a curved wooden bar with a bucket suspended on each side. distributes the weight through the body structure rather than fighting it. The yoke cost her sixpence from a hardware dealer on Tower Bridge Road. It has paid for itself 10,000 times. You need a yoke. The mathematics are clear. 2 buckets instead of 1 means twice the income per trip to the tannery, which means either more earnings in the same time or less time working, and more time doing the maintenance of survival. But a yoke costs sixpence, and sixpence is 3 days' food money, and investing 3 days' food money in equipment requires a level of surplus you have not achieved yet. This is the trap that is so complete, so perfectly circular, that it seems almost engineered. You need capital to improve your productivity. Improving your productivity would generate capital. The lack of capital prevents the generating. Victorian economists have names for this problem, which they discuss in lecture halls and scientific journals distributed at societies. Out on the street, you do not have names for it. You just live it. In the mid-afternoon, between your second delivery and your final planned sweep, you cross the river. Doyle mentioned this morning, briefly, that a smaller operation on the north bank near the river extension of Bermondsey Street is paying a better rate this week for high-quality material. A different process, something new. Higher grade means higher price. You walk north to the river, to Waterloo Bridge. Waterloo Bridge in 1860 is the finest bridge in London. John Rennie designed it, finished in 1817 after 4 years of construction. 9 arches of Cornish granite, each arch 120 feet wide. The whole thing proportioned in a way that seems less like engineering and more like a decision about what grace looks like in stone. When it opened, Canova, the great Italian sculptor, called it the noblest bridge in the world. You walk out onto it. The Thames in March, in the afternoon light, is grey-brown and wide and moving. Below you, the river traffic is dense, lighters carrying cargo to and from the ships anchored in the pool, wherries carrying passengers, the occasional steamer throwing a dark ribbon of coal smoke against the sky. On the Southwark bank, warehouses and wharves crowd down to the water's edge. On the north bank, what will become the embankment is still being planned. The north bank still a confusion of stairs and landing stages and the backs of buildings running directly to the mud. The city stretches in all directions like something too large to be entirely believed. St. Paul's Dome from here, the same way Wren intended, visible from the river, visible from the south bank, a vertical statement in a city that is otherwise horizontal in its ambitions. The dome catches the flat March light and holds it. Further east, the Tower of London, squat and permanent. To the west, the Gothic towers of the new Houses of Parliament, finished just 10 years ago. The stones still clean, the carving still sharp. A building that will look ancient in 200 years but is right now newer than many of the people walking past it. This is the city that built the empire, the railways, the Great Exhibition, the Crystal Palace, the Penny Post, the Metropolitan Railway. The city that is currently building the greatest sewage system in the world, Bazalgette's intercepting sewers beneath these very streets. This is also the city that has 100,000 dogs and requires the produce of those dogs to be collected each morning by people like you in order to keep its boots supple. Both of these things are true simultaneously. You are part of this. Not in a way that anyone would acknowledge or record, not in a way that earns a plaque or a mention in the accounts of Victorian progress, but in the physical, undeniable, chemical way that the thing you collect becomes part of the thing those ships carry and those shops sell and those gentlemen wear. A carriage passes behind you on the bridge, close enough that you step back from the rail. Inside, a woman in something blue and expensive, a hat with a feature, is talking with a man. The man is wearing gloves. Dark brown leather, slightly shiny. The carriage passes toward the north bank. You stay on the bridge for a few more minutes watching the river. Then you pick up your bucket and walk on. The north bank is a different country from Bermondsey. The streets here are wider, better maintained. The residents are several social grades above your usual environment, which means your presence, bucket in hand, the general air of someone who has spent the morning in productive unpleasantness, is more conspicuous. You move quickly, purposefully. The walk of someone with legitimate business in this area, even if the nature of that business would not bear being thought about too carefully. The operation on Broadwall Street is smaller than the Bermondsey Hide and Skin Company. 2 men and a boy tanning lighter grades. Gloves, bookbinding, rather than heavy boot leather. The man who runs it is called Pierce. His manner is more tentative than Doyle's, which at first suggested flexibility but has turned out to mean something different. He's more cautious, requires more convincing and slower to part with money. You show him your bucket. He looks. He reaches in, which Doyle never does, but Pierce seems to need the tactile confirmation and removes a sample. This is better than usual, he says. Borough Park, north side. He nods, turning the sample in his fingers. This works for glove leather. We need precise baiting for gloves. Too soft and the grain won't hold, not soft enough, and he stops himself. He does not usually explain his work to street finders. It was a moment of professional enthusiasm that he is now retrieving. How much, you ask? 4 pence. Full bucket. 4 pence. A penny better than Doyle paid this morning for inferior material. The walk to the north bank has been worth it. 7 pence total for the day, and it is only mid-afternoon. You start south. On your way back over the bridge, you take a wrong turn. The north bank is not your territory. You do not know the streets, and end up on a stretch closer to the Strand than you intended. And you see the shop, a bootmaker's, well appointed, bow window, polished glass, the interior lit by gas lamps that make everything inside look warmer than the street. The window display is arranged with care. Several pairs of boots and shoes, angled slightly, showing their construction and finish. The sign above reads, E. Thornton and Son, bootmakers to the gentry. You stop. The riding boots in the window, dark tan, almost mahogany. Polished to a depth that makes the light seem to come from inside the leather rather than reflect off it. The curve of the toe, the way the leather has been worked so that the seams are almost invisible, so that the boot looks less like a constructed thing and more like something grown. The shape is deliberate and exact. This is Bermondsey leather. You know it without being told. This is the leather that comes out of the tan pits. On Tanner Street, worked through months of chemistry, finished by the curriers in Wapping, purchased by the Thornton family and crafted into boots that a gentleman will wear to ride in Hyde Park on a Sunday morning. Never once, not even for a fraction of a second, thinking about where the leather came from. A boy appears in the doorway, 14 maybe, in a clean apron, the very image of respectable industry. Move on, he says, not unkindly, just clearly. The reflex of someone trained to keep the shop's immediate environment consistent with the shop's clientele. You're not consistent with the shop's clientele. You look at him. He looks at your bucket. He looks back at you. Please, he adds. You look back at the boots. You contributed to that. In a specific, chemical, undeniable way, the bucket you carried this morning is part of what is in that window. The deposits from the Gentleman's Park dogs, the borough material, the grey-white alkaline material that Pierce picked up and turned into the precise baiting solution that softened the grain of the leather before it went into the tan liquor. You are in those boots, not metaphorically, chemically. Move on, the boy says again gently. You move on, not angry, or not exactly angry. It is something more precise than anger. The feeling of a calculation coming to a result that is accurate but unjust. The arithmetic of the Victorian economy. The invisible labour supporting the visible wealth. Perfectly clear. It is just that nobody has built the acknowledgement of that into the system. You carry your empty bucket back through the streets to Waterloo Bridge, across the river, back to Bermondsey, where the afternoon streets have the last of their business to yield. The late afternoon has a different quality from the morning. The light changes first. The grey March afternoon, already not generous, starts to yellow and flatten around 4 o'clock. Shadows lengthen. The street sounds shift. The morning, energy of commerce giving way to the later traffic of people heading home. The day's work done. The body registering its hours. You work the park route again. Martha was right. The late afternoon walk time is 4 to 6 and the evidence of it is there. Your shoulder aches. Your feet have found their rhythm. The dull background ache that you now experience is simply the condition of the feet rather than a complaint. The right foot, where the sole gap is, has admitted water twice today. You are cold in the way March makes you cold, not dramatically but persistently, a penetrating chill that lives in the joints and settles in the back. You keep moving because moving is warmer than standing still. The bucket fills. A dog across the street, a large black dog on a long chain, outside a house near the park, watches you work with intelligent attention. Dogs have always been comfortable with you. They find you interesting in the way dogs find anyone who smells complex interesting. The chain dog watches you work, tail moving slowly, and you feel the small, peculiar warmth of being regarded without judgment. You have thought, once or twice, about getting a dog. The arithmetic does not work. A dog would need feeding, but the thought returns. You complete the afternoon circuit by 5:30. The light is going. Your bucket is 3/4 full. Not a maximum haul, but solid. Good quality. Mostly dry material from the park area. You walk to Doyle's gate. Doyle is at the gate himself, clearly ready to close. The yard is lit now by a couple of lanterns, their circles of yellow light making everything outside more thoroughly dark. He looks at your bucket. The same 4-second evaluation. Late, he says. Afternoon run. Borough. Same as this morning. He tips the bucket slightly, looks at it. 3 halfpence. This is the same quality as the morning material. You paid 3 for that. Morning's easier to work with. Afternoon material gets into the liquor differently. He looks at you. 2 halfpenny, you say. He places 2 pence and a halfpenny in your hand without further comment. He closes the gate. The day's total, 3 pence from the morning delivery, 4 pence from Pierce on the North Bank, 2.5 pence from Doyle this evening, 9.5 pence. Not quite a shilling, but close enough that the gap between what you earned and what a shilling would feel like sits in your chest as something specific and nameable. Not despair, not quite. More like the feeling of reaching for something on a shelf and finding it exactly 1 inch beyond the tips of your fingers. You stand in the yard entrance for a moment, bucket empty, shoulder aching with the particular relief of weight removed. The evening air over Bermondsey is doing its thing. The tanneries have moved from their daytime roar to a lower register, still present, still the fundamental bass note of this neighbourhood, but quieter now, the way a factory quiets when the shift ends and the machines are still warm but no longer working. The smell does not change. The smell is structural here. It lives in the walls. It will outlast the buildings if you pulled them down. You count the coins again, not because you have misremembered, because the physical act of counting is something. 3 pence, 4 pence, 2.5 pence, 9.5 pence in the worn leather pouch in your inner pocket, against your sternum, warm from your body. Martha is gone already. You saw her leave an hour ago, 2 empty buckets swinging from her yoke, moving with the particular gait of a woman who has covered her ground and settled her accounts and is now done with the day's arguments. You start toward Horsley Street. Tom is already there when you arrive, sitting on his pallet, eating bread and something from a tin. He nods at your arrival the way he always nods, a small acknowledgement that you exist and have returned, which is all the greeting either of you requires at the end of a working day. Good day, he asks. 9.5 pence, you say. He nods. This communicates everything. You sit on your own pallet and remove your boots. The right boot. The gap in the sole has been admitting cold water since early afternoon, and your foot is damp in a way that is not uncomfortable exactly, but is the kind of damp that takes an hour by the stove to correct. You press the sole seam, feel it flex. You need to fix this boot. You need 3 pence for the cobbler. You have 3 pence set aside for the cobbler. You have had 3 pence set aside for the cobbler for 2 weeks. The 3 pence is also what stands between eating adequately and eating insufficiently on a bad day. And bad days come without announcing themselves. This is what you have learned in 7 months in this city. The contingency is always real. The margin is always thin. And the choice between the boot and the buffer is a choice you cannot win either way. You set the boot by the stove to dry. Tom passes you a cloth-wrapped piece of bread without sitting up. There is something about this gesture, small, wordless, the kind of thing that happens between people who share a cold cellar room and understand that the sharing itself is the warmth that sits in you more gently than it has any reason to. Ta, you say. He grunts. You eat the bread slowly. The stove ticks as it works. Here is something you've been thinking about since you stood on Waterloo Bridge this afternoon. The bridge was Rennie's, finished in 1817. 9 arches, Cornish granite, the proportions of something that does not need to apologise for existing. The dome of St. Paul's, visible over the north bank. Wren's, finished in 1710, after 35 years of building, after the Great Fire of 1666 had reduced the old medieval cathedral to rubble. These are the things people point to when they talk about London. The cathedral, the bridge, Parliament, currently being finished in its new, Gothic clothes. The Crystal Palace, built in Hyde Park in 1851 for the Great Exhibition and still standing, moved to Sydenham now, enormous and improbable in iron and glass. These are the things in the guidebooks, the engravings, the prints sold in the shops on the Strand. Nobody builds a monument to the chemistry of leather preparation. Nobody commissions an engraving of the baiting vat. Yet the baiting vat is older than the cathedral. The tan pits of Bermondsey were operating 500 years before Wren set the first stone of the dome. The leather trade is older than almost everything else in this city, older than the guilds that nominally govern it, older than the streets that contain it. And underneath the leather trade, this specific and undignified necessity that you perform, not ancient in the sense of grand, ancient in the sense of persistent, the way weeds are ancient, not because anyone chose them, but because they continued when nothing else did, because they were necessary and hardy and unregarded, and they just kept growing in the gaps between the more celebrated things. You lie back on your pallet, the candle on the table, Tom's breathing deepening into sleep already. He works 12-hour shifts. His body schedules its shutdown with the efficiency of a machine that knows its own maintenance requirements. Outside, Horsley Street, the sounds of the working neighbourhood going through its evening. Voices, carts, the distant percussion of something closing, someone dropping something, a dog expressing an opinion. You put your hand on your chest over the leather pouch with the coins. 9.5 pence. You're going to buy the yoke tomorrow. This decision arrives quietly, the way real decisions arrive, not as drama, but as the moment when the argument finally stops and what you already knew becomes simply what you're going to do. The yoke costs 6 pence. You have 9.5 pence. After the yoke, you have 3.5 pence. 3.5 pence is tight for food, but manageable for one day, and 2 buckets tomorrow instead of 1 means the arithmetic fixes itself by evening. You will buy the yoke. You fall asleep faster than you expected to, the decision settling into your body like a weight set down. April arrives the way Martha said it would. Not in one day, not with a single event. Gradually, the way all real changes happen. The light lasting a few minutes longer each evening, the morning cold losing its edge by mid-morning. The streets acquiring a different quality of mud. Wet mud becoming dry mud becoming dust. The city smells different in April. Still terrible, still fundamentally Bermondsey, but a different register of terrible, sharper, more chemical, less deadening than the damp cold months. The yoke changes everything. You buy it on a Wednesday from the hardware dealer on Tower Bridge Road. A curved wooden bar, 2 metal hooks, simple and ugly and functional. The dealer sells them to market traders, to milkmaids, to crossing sweepers carrying equipment. He does not ask what you're using it for. You do not tell him. 2 buckets. The weight distributed across your shoulders through the structural support of your spine instead of hanging from one arm. Your first day with the yoke, you fill both buckets by 10 in the morning. Your first day with the yoke, you earn 6 pence before noon. Not a shilling, but close. You see Agnes Purse 3 days after she took your section. She's on Long Lane, working the lower stretch, her own territory, with the focused efficiency of a woman who knows every stone of every pavement she has ever worked. You pass at a distance. She does not acknowledge you. Martha was right. By Thursday of that week, Agnes had overextended, worked the upper section dry in 2 days, found diminishing returns, retreated to her own ground. Your section came back by default. No conversation required, no confrontation, just the informal economy of scarcity rebalancing itself. You do not feel triumphant. You feel the small, sober satisfaction of having been correct in your reading of the situation, of having taken Martha's advice and moved rather than fought. This is also a kind of knowledge. Knowing when fighting costs more than it gains. Agnes Purse is 40 years your senior in this trade, and her claim to the Grange Road section is simply longer than yours. She is not wrong. She is just senior. The distinction matters. You keep your section. You work your route. You carry 2 buckets now. May brings the smell in force. If you were trying to explain May in Bermondsey to someone who had never been here, you would start by saying that the human nose can, under certain circumstances, feel physical pain, not metaphorical pain, not just displeasure, physical pain. The olfactory nerve is a real nerve, connected to the real brain, and when it receives certain inputs at sufficient intensity, it registers a response that is indistinguishable from being struck in the face, gently struck, but struck. Bermondsey in May is that experience. The tan pits at their active peak, the warm weather accelerating the chemistry, the river at low tide, the South Bank wharves in afternoon heat, the glue factories 2 streets over, the gut spinners, the accumulated biological output of 500,000 people and their animals warming in the May sun. The strange thing, the thing you would not have predicted 7 months ago, is that you work better in it than you did in winter. Not because it becomes pleasant, it does not become pleasant, but because the smell is information and you have learned to read it. On a warm May morning, you can walk down a street and know, before you can see it, what the morning has yielded and where and in what quantity. The warm air carries everything. The signals that took you 20 minutes to identify in March now take you 30 seconds in May. Your bucket fills faster. Your quality judgment improves. Your route efficiency, the specific sequence of streets that maximizes yield per hour of walking, has been refined by 4 months of daily revision. You are getting good at this. This is a thought you have one morning in the 3rd week of May, standing at the tannery gate waiting for Doyle, 2 full buckets on the yoke. You are getting good at this. The specificity of the skill, the precision of the judgment, the economy of movement. It is not a thought that produces obvious pride. What you're getting good at is not something you can discuss at the dinner table. If you had a dinner table, which you do not, you have a palette and a stove and Tom's bread. But competence is its own thing. It lives in the hands and the eyes and the body regardless of whether the social world has a category for it. You know this street, this work, this city in the particular register, that only this work reveals it. That is something. Doyle is at the gate when you arrive. He looks at your 2 buckets. He looks at you. For a moment, a fraction of a moment, something in his expression shifts. Not warmth exactly. Something more restrained than warmth. The involuntary acknowledgement of a professional recognizing a development in another professional. He controls it quickly. He tips the first bucket, tips the second, stands up. 4pence halfpenny each, he says. This is the best price he has ever offered you. Thank you, you say, and then feel immediately that you should not have said that it sounds too eager, that it reveals how much this matters. Doyle's expression gives nothing. Morning's good this week, he says. Warm weather, quality's up. He places the coins in your hand, 9pence for 2 buckets, before noon. You walk out of the yard into the May morning and stand for a moment on Tanner Street with 9pence in your hand. You buy a meat pie from the cook shop on Bermondsey Street. 2pence. You eat it standing up, leaning against the wall, watching the street traffic. The filling is mostly potato and something that aspires to be beef. The pastry is thick and slightly grey. It is the best thing you have eaten in 2 weeks. You eat it slowly. The sun is warm on your left shoulder. The death happens in June. You've been expecting something like it, in the abstract way that everyone who works the Bermondsey streets knows the tanneries are not gentle places. The physical conditions are what they are: wet, caustic, slippery. The beam work, the lime pits, the long hours and the chronic exposure. His name is Daniel Farrow, 18 years old, pit man at the Bermondsey Hide and Skin Company, one of the men you sometimes see moving hides with the long poles when you make your morning delivery. He has been there 3 years. On a Tuesday morning in the second week of June, he falls. The pit edge is slippery. It is always slippery. The reason it is always slippery is that it is always wet, and the reason it is always wet is that the work requires it. And nobody has built a better edge treatment because the cost of building a better edge treatment has never been weighed against the cost of a man falling into a lime pit at working temperature. Daniel Farrow falls into the lime pit at working temperature. He is pulled out. He's alive when they pull him out. He's not alive by the afternoon. You're at the gate for the morning delivery when the news moves through the yard. It moves the way serious news moves in a working place. Quickly, quietly, person to person, a ripple of changed faces. The men in the yard stop moving for a moment, the specific kind of stillness that happens when something bad has happened to someone specific and recently. Doyle comes out of the office. His face is the face of a man who is doing what faces do when they decide to give nothing away, and the effort of that decision is visible if you know what to look for. Gates closed for an hour, he says. Come back, you walk to the end of Tanner Street and sit on the curb. You sit there for an hour. You're thinking about Daniel Farrow, who you knew to nod at, who was 18 years old and who has been pulled out of a lime pit in time to die instead of drowning. The specific cruelty of this distinction, in time to understand what had happened to him, in time to feel it. You're thinking about the pit edge. You have stood at the edge of those pits once, when Doyle sent you with a message to the foreman. The edge is what you expected, worn brick, wet, slick with the overflow of the liquor. The foreman stood at the edge without apparent concern, the casual intimacy of a man who's been near this edge for 20 years and has constructed from that proximity a competence and a carelessness that are indistinguishable from outside. Daniel Farrow was 18, 3 years at the pits, young enough that the carelessness had not yet developed into something indistinguishable from safety. Or maybe it had. Maybe that is exactly what happened. The hour passes. You go back to the gate. Doyle takes your delivery without the usual evaluation. He names a fair price without negotiation. He counts the coins carefully. Neither of you says anything about Daniel Farrow. What you think about on the walk home from the tannery that evening is the particular visibility of some deaths and the invisibility of others. Daniel Farrow will be buried in St. Mary Magdalene's churchyard, where his family can visit. There will be a record, a death certificate, a parish register, a line in the tannery's ledger where his name stops appearing on the wage list. These records exist because they are required to exist, because Victorian England has developed sufficient bureaucracy to document the deaths of working men. But no newspaper will mention it. The Illustrated London News, which you've seen in the coffeehouse window on the Borough High Street, does not carry articles about pit men who fall into lime vats. The Times does not run leaders about the safety conditions in the Bermondsey tanneries. The boots in the window on the Strand do not change price. This is not a new thought. You have been having versions of this thought since your first week here. The invisible necessity of things that do not appear in the accounts of how things are made. But Daniel Farrow makes it immediate. Not abstract, specific, 18 years old, 3 years at the pits, known to nod at. The city uses everything, Martha said. The city used Daniel Farrow for 3 years. Now it has used him completely and will use someone else in his place by Monday. You walk through the warm June evening on Bermondsey Street, the smell of the tanneries behind you, the smell of the river ahead, a different register of the same fundamental London atmosphere. A cart going the other way, a man driving, not looking at you, a woman at a window above a shop, shaking something out, a child running past with something in its fist, food, or something like food. The particular late-light quality of June in the city, everything slightly golden in the last hour before sunset, the light flattening and softening the details and making the buildings on Bermondsey Street look, briefly, like they are made of something warmer than brick. You pass the pub on the corner, the sound of it, voices, a burst of laughter, the bass note of accumulated humanity in an enclosed space, reaches you on the street and then recedes. You keep walking. Martha finds you the next morning at the park. You have not spoken since the morning she gave you the route, 2 months ago. You see each other at the tannery gate regularly, the brief nod of fellow workers, the exchange of no words. This morning she is already at the north gate of the park when you arrive, her 2 buckets set down beside the wall, herself sitting on a low step. She's eating an apple. She does not offer you any, and you do not expect her to. You heard about the Pharaoh boy, she says, not a question. Yes, you say. She nods. She takes another bite of the apple. She chews. 3rd one this decade, she says, in that yard alone. Who were the others? Before your time. Before mine, one of them. She pauses. Lime pit or the beam. It's always the lime pit or the beam. She finishes the apple. She puts the core in her pocket, which you note because it means she's not wasting it, which means she's going to eat the core later, which tells you something about the arithmetic of her week. Does it get easier, you ask, when someone goes? Martha looks at you for a moment. Her expression is not unkind. It is the expression of a person who's been asked a question they have answered before and knows the answer is not what the asker wants. It gets more familiar, she says. That's not the same thing. A pause. This city is not careful with people, she says. Never has been. I've watched it since before the railways, boy. It wasn't careful. Then, it's not careful now. It builds things. Beautiful things, magnificent things, bridges and cathedrals and exhibition halls. And the building costs people. Always has. Always will. She stands up, picks up her yoke, settles it across her shoulders with the practised ease of someone who has worn that weight for decades. You do your work. You take care of yourself as well as you can. You don't fall in the lime pit. That's the whole lesson. She picks up her buckets. The park's yours this morning, she says. I'm going north. She walks away without looking back. You stand at the park gate for a moment. You do your work. You don't fall in the lime pit. Not a comfortable lesson, but an honest one. The summer deepens into July, and July in Bermondsey is exactly what you were warned it would be. The heat arrives like a decision the sky has made and refuses to reconsider. Not the pleasant warmth of May, when the sun felt like a development. July heat is something else. It presses down onto the streets and into the buildings and under your collar, and it sits there, and it amplifies everything it touches, every smell, every sound, every ache in the shoulders and the feet and the hands. The Thames, 2 months before Bazalgette's sewers change everything, is doing what the Thames in July does in the absence of those sewers. The great stink was 1858. This is 1860, and the river has not forgotten. The smell reaches up through the streets from the south bank, which is close enough that on certain mornings You can smell the river before you smell the tanneries, which is an achievement. Parliament, you have heard this from Tom, who reads the halfpenny papers, is threatening to hang chloride of lime on its curtains again. The windows are closed. The debates are shorter than usual because nobody wants to stay in a room with riverside windows in July for longer than necessary. The pure finding is excellent in July. This is the paradox of summer work. The conditions that make your life most uncomfortable are also the conditions that produce the best material. Warm nights accelerate the chemistry. Dry days improve the alkalinity. The dogs of Bermondsey and the borough and the park to the north are, this July, providing you with material of a quality you have not seen since you started. Doyle pays you well this month. Not generously. Doyle does not do generosity. He does accuracy. And accuracy in July means a fair price because the material is genuinely good. You're averaging 11 pence a day, sometimes a shilling, once a shilling and a halfpenny in a single extraordinary Thursday that you went over in your head that evening 3 times. A shilling and a halfpenny. You buy the boots in the second week of July, not the boots from the Strand window. You're not confused about what you are, but good boots from the second-hand boot dealer on Long Lane, who has connections with households whose servants receive their cast-off clothing, and cast-off footwear and cast-off everything, and who pays a penny for a used boot and sells it for 3p, and whose stock is consequently uneven but occasionally remarkable. You spend 4p on a pair of men's boots, brown leather, slightly worn at the heel, a small repair at the toe that someone has done neatly. Solid sole, no gaps. They are the best footwear you have owned in your life. You walk home from Long Lane in them, your old boots under your arm, and the difference, the simple, physical difference of a solid sole between your foot and the cobblestones, does something to the way you move, straightens something. You walk differently in boots that work. This is what good equipment does. The yoke, the boots, each one a small physical argument that things can be better than they are. In the 3rd week of July, you have the conversation with Doyle that changes how you understand yourself. It is not a dramatic conversation. Doyle does not do dramatic, but it is the conversation nonetheless. You've brought in a particularly good delivery, both buckets full, the material so consistent in quality that even Doyle's opening assessment showed something approximating appreciation. He paid 5p per bucket without being asked. 10p before noon, cash in hand, and you're at the gate about to leave when he says, "You know the Borough Park well now." You stop. "Yes, sir." And the street pattern north of it, the Newington side. "Fairly well." He's looking at you, doing the grey-eyed evaluation. "I have a buyer," he says, "who's expanding. He needs a reliable second source, consistent quality, regular supply. Morning delivery, 6 days." A pause. "He pays 4p per bucket. Always. Not market price. Fixed." You look at him. "That's less than you pay," you say. "He's not me. He's a smaller operation. The fixed rate is the offer." Another pause. "The route he needs covered is Newington and north. Not territory anyone local is working. Well, good park access, good residential density. Your skill set fits it." This is the most Doyle has said to you in the entire 7 months of your acquaintance. You think about it. Newington, north of the borough, better residential streets, wealthier dogs, the potential for very high quality material. But a fixed rate at 4p means no negotiation, no Pierce-style supplementation. On a good day you would earn less than you currently earn selling to Doyle at market rate. On a bad day you would earn more, because bad days at fixed rate pay the same as good days, stability versus flexibility. The arithmetic takes you about 30 seconds. "Thank you," you say, "but I'll stay with you." Doyle nods. If he is pleased or displeased, his face declines to participate. "Fair enough," he says. You walk away from the gate with 10p in your pouch, and something else you cannot quite name. A decision made on your own judgment, for your own reasons, that held up to examination, that felt like being, in some small but specific way, a professional making a professional decision. You are 15 years old. You are, in some small but specific way, a professional. August. The frost fairs are a winter memory. The river runs warm and wide and terrible smelling. The city goes about its business in the heat with the particular London determination that treats summer as an inconvenience rather than a pleasure. Sleeves rolled, hats pressed, the general atmosphere of a civilization declining to be distracted by something as frivolous as beautiful weather. You've been in London for a year. Not exactly. Your arrival was September of last year. The wagon from Maidstone, the cousin who had moved to Manchester. But counting forward from the first week, the cold cellar room, the first confused morning, the first attempt at the scraper motion that came out wrong, it is close enough to a year that it sits in you as a round number and means something. You are not the person who arrived, not dramatically different. You do not look different particularly. Your face has not changed. You're taller by perhaps half an inch, which happens when you are 15. Your hands are harder, your shoulders uneven, right notably more developed than left, the yoke notwithstanding. You move differently on the street, the specific walk of someone who knows the ground, who has stopped navigating and started simply moving. You know things. You know the quality hierarchy of the tannery, what Doyle values and why, the specific vocabulary of evaluation he uses without using words. You know the seasonal patterns of the streets and how they shift from month to month, how July differs from March, how rain affects the work. You know Sid's bucket carrying technique, which you have adopted. You know Martha's route, which you have memorised and refined. You know the park at the north end of the borough, and the specific timing of the morning walk that makes it productive. You know that Bermondsey was a monastery before it was a leather district, and that the monks were curing hides in the 12th century, and that this connects your morning work to a chain of human activity so long that it disappears into medieval mist. You know that Daniel Farrow died in June, and that the pit edge where he fell has not been changed. You know where the gin shops are and why their customers look the way their customers look, and you know the difference between that look and drunk, which is a different look with a different future. You know Tom's sleep schedule. You know which mornings Mrs. Hennessy at the greengrocer's has bruised apples at reduced price. You know the sound of the particular tannery bell that marks the shift change at 7, which you use as a morning time signal. You are a Bermondsey person. This is strange, and then not strange. The way all changes becomes simply the new condition. On a Sunday in the last week of August, you go to Greenwich, not for work. Sunday is not a work day. Sunday is the day the shop closes and the city half closes, and even Doyle's gate stays shut until afternoon, and the streets have a different quality of activity. Families, church-goers, the less frantic movement of a day that is not optimised for commerce. You go to Greenwich because Tom is from Greenwich, and his sister is visiting, and Tom has invited you, and you have not been that far east on the river, and it is a fine morning, and you have a shilling in your pocket that does not need to be spent today. The wherry from Waterloo Bridge cost 3p. The waterman, a different man from anyone you've used before, younger, dark, with the enormous arms of a man who rows for a living, works the oars with the economical stroke of someone who's not putting on a show for passengers, just doing the job. The boat moves downstream. The city opens. Downstream from the Pool of London, the Thames widens. The ships anchored in the lower reaches grow more, numerous as you go east. Not the neat commercial vessels of the upper river, but larger ships, ocean ships, the ones that have come from distances that make the word distance do different work. Their rigging against the August sky in the morning light is something architectural, a floating forest. The south bank here is different from Bermondsey. The marshes begin, the land flattens toward the estuary. The smell of salt and mud replaces the urban chemistry of the tanning district. You sit in the bow of the wherry and do not speak. The waterman does not speak either. This is appropriate. Greenwich comes around a bend in the river, and then you see the buildings. You were not expecting this. You knew Greenwich was there. You knew it had importance, naval importance, historical importance. The Royal Observatory on the hill, where astronomer Royal Airy runs the operations that produce the Greenwich Mean Time signal that synchronises the railways across England. You knew it was important the way you know many things about London are important without having been there. But knowing and seeing are not the same thing. The Royal Naval Hospital rises from the waterfront. Two massive domed towers, paired, facing each other across a central space open to the river. Behind them, the colonnaded wings extending, the whole thing symmetrical in a way that makes the human eye, which did not choose to care about symmetry but cannot help it, do something involuntary. Christopher Wren designed it. Not alone, Hawksmoor, Vanbrugh, others, but Wren's plan, completed in 1712, 300 men of the Navy pensioned and housed inside a building that treats their retirement as a statement about what the country owes them. The domes catching the august morning light on their white stone, the river in front of them, the hill behind them, the observatory at the top. The wherry pulls up to the landing stage. You step out onto Greenwich and stand there. Tom's sister appears from somewhere, a small woman of about 20 with Tom's nose and a more expressive version of Tom's generally unexpressive face. And she and Tom embrace and speak together in the rapid, low tone of siblings exchanging private information at speed. You let them do this. You stand at the waterfront and look at the buildings, the granite stairs leading up from the river, the long colonnaded walkways, the painted hall. You can see through an open door on the way in, a glimpse of the interior, and even a glimpse is enough. The ceiling paintings, the light through the tall windows, the accumulated statement of a century of institutional grandeur. Inside the painted hall, you look up. Thornhill painted the ceiling. Sir James Thornhill. 40 years of his life going into this ceiling, a project so vast and detailed that even people who do not know his name are stopped by it when they enter the room for the first time. The allegory of Protestant succession. The glorification of naval power. William and Mary in the centre, attended by figures of virtue and peace, and the personified conceit of an empire that considers itself the natural conclusion of history. You're a 15-year-old pure finder from Maidstone, Kent, standing in the painted hall of the Royal Naval Hospital, looking up at a ceiling that took 40 years to paint, inside a building that took 20 years to build. For men who spent their lives at sea in service of the empire, this ceiling celebrates. You stand there for a long time. The old sailor finds you after you come out the painted hall, not seeks you out, just happens. The Naval Hospital grounds are full of pensioners, men in their 60s and 70s and older, some mobile, some less so, distributed across the benches and paths in the summer morning sun. They are called Greenwich pensioners. They wear blue coats with brass buttons. They have the particular bearing of men who were once subject to intense external discipline and have retained the posture of it even decades after the discipline ended. He's sitting on a bench near the river wall. 70s. One arm. The missing arm is the right, the coat sleeve pinned back neatly, and the one remaining hand holds a small pipe that he is not smoking, just holding, the way people hold things when they are thinking. He looks at you and looks at your bucket, which you have with you out of habit. You do not work Sundays, but the bucket has become an extension of you in the way tools do when you carry them long enough. "First time?" he asks. "Yes, sir." He nods at the seat beside him. "Sit down if you like." You sit. He does not speak for a while. Neither do you. The river goes past. A lighter loaded with barrels is being rowed upstream by 4 men, their oars moving in the slow synchrony of heavy work. The sound of the oars in the water, a regular hollow knock, the pull, the feather, the next stroke. "Where are you from?" he asks eventually. "Maidstone, Kent, Bermondsey now?" "Bermondsey." He looks at your bucket again. He's not stupid, this man. He has placed you correctly. "How long?" he asks. "Almost a year." He nods. He puts the pipe in his mouth, still unlit. "I was at sea at your age," he says. "Cabin boy on a merchant brig. I thought it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me." A pause. "Then I joined the Navy and learned what worse was." He says this with the particular dark humour of someone who has been refining the observation for 50 years and is satisfied with the current version. "Were you in action?" you ask. 4 engagements, 2 proper battles." He touches the pinned sleeve briefly. "Lost this at Cape Finisterre in 1747. The second battle, the one Anson won. I was 20 years old and I thought I was dying." A pause. "I wasn't dying, but the arm was gone by the time they sorted me out. Cape Finisterre, 1747, over 100 years ago. You were not born. Your parents were not born. Your grandparents were. Children." "Have you been here since?" you ask. "Since 1762. I came in at 40, which they allowed because of the arm." He looks at the buildings behind you. "It's not a bad life. 3 meals, a bed, the river, men who remember the same things I remember." A pause. "The things I remember are not always things you want company in remembering, but it helps, knowing someone else was there." He's quiet for a moment. "You work the tanneries?" he asks. "Supply work, you say." Which is true, and which is what you say when the specific nature of the supply is better left unspecified. He nods. He does not press. A man who has spent his life with sailors learns not to press. People who work hard at difficult things do not require their work to be interrogated. "Do you know what the tanning trade is for this city?" he asks. "The leather, you say. Not just any leather. Navy leather. Every ship in the Navy wears leather somewhere. The washer seals, the bellows, the boots, the belts, the harnesses. Every rope has leather chafing gear where it meets the block. Every pump has leather valves." He looks at the ships on the river. "Without Bermondsey, the Navy doesn't sail. Without the Navy," he gestures at the buildings, "none of this. The hospital, the observatory, the empire that pays for both." He looks at you. "Whatever you do on those streets," he says, "don't let anyone tell you it's not part of this." He puts the pipe back in his mouth. "That's the lesson," he says. "The same chain runs from your street all the way out here and further. They just cut the chain in the middle before they show it to you. You sit with this. The river goes past." What's your name, lad? Will Fletcher. Fletcher, he nods. Someone in your family made arrows, probably a long time ago. You hadn't thought of this. The name, Fletcher, an arrow maker. Some ancestor in some century before any living person's memory, shaping the arrows that somebody shot at somebody at Agincourt. Or Crecy, some chain of cause and effect that ended up with a boy named Fletcher on a bench in Greenwich in August 1860. I'm Richard Holt, the old sailor says, formerly petty officer, HMS Monmouth, now formerly of everywhere. He extends his remaining hand. You shake it. His grip is what you would expect, the hand of a man who spent 40 years hauling on ropes with it. Your own grip, after almost a year of the bucket and the yoke and the scraper, is not nothing. He registers this. Good hand, he says. Work, you say. That's all any of it is, he says. Tom finds you eventually and you climb the hill together. The hill behind the hospital, the Royal Observatory at the top, the meridian line running north-south through the courtyard. The Astronomer Royal inside, calculating time for the railways, the Empire, the ships. The hill itself steep enough that you're breathing properly by the time you reach the top. You turn around, London spreads before you, the river bending west. The dome of St. Paul's visible above the North Bank haze, exactly where Wren put it. Visible from here, from this hill, from the southeast approach to the city, the landmark working exactly as designed. The cluster of city towers, Southwark and Bermondsey on the south bank, the tanneries smoke invisible in the summer air, but their smell present. Faint, a low note under everything else. The Pool of London choked with ships. The Pool of London is never not choked with ships. It is one of the wonders of the world, and the Victorians are too accustomed to it to call it that. But that is what it is. The greatest concentration of commercial shipping on earth, the physical evidence of an empire that pulls the products of every continent through this one stretch of river. You can see Bermondsey from here. Not specifically. You cannot pick out Horsley Street, cannot see the tannery gates, cannot see the park where you work the morning route, but you can see the district, the low, industrial area on the south bank, the smoke above it even on a Sunday. That is where you work, that is the world you know, and from here it is just one small section of something enormous. The city spreading in every direction to horizons it exceeds. The river connecting it to everything, the ships carrying that connection outward, across the Channel, across the Atlantic, to the coasts of India and China, and the Americas and the places where the leather ends up after it leaves the window on the Strand. Told you it was worth it, Tom says. You don't answer, you look. The old sailor said the same chain runs from your street all the way out here and further. They just cut the chain in the middle before they show it to you. From here, on this hill, you can see enough of the chain to believe him. Bermondsey, there on the south bank, producing the leather that supplies the navy, that supplies the empire that fills the river below you with ships that carry the goods that end up in the counting houses at the Royal Exchange, in the coffee houses, in the drawing rooms where people read Mayhew's book about the poor of London without knowing, or choosing not to know, that the poor of London are the mechanism by which everything else works. You are one small part of this machine, not the visible part, not the celebrated part, but a part that, if it stopped, would be felt in the tanning yard, in the navy's boots, in the ships, in the empire. The chain is real. It is just invisible at your end. Tom's sister serves cold meat and pickles at a table in the courtyard, and you eat quickly and gratefully, and then the afternoon moves in the way Sunday afternoons move, slower than weekdays, the light at a different angle, the sounds a different register. The wherry back to London leaves at 4. You sit in the bow again. The city approaches from downstream, growing as you come upriver. The dome of St. Paul's returning to its position as the visual anchor of the north. Bank. The tannery district coming back into your peripheral awareness before it enters your other senses. The waterman rows, the oars knock, the river moves. You are going home. September arrives. Almost exactly 1 year. The mornings are cooler again. The smell of the streets shifts back toward the cold weather register. Tamped down, the edge off, the brutal amplitude of July heat a memory. Your right shoulder has developed its working muscle now, the asymmetry settled and familiar. You buy the cobbler visit, 3pence, the gap in the old boot sole repaired. The boots go in the corner of the cellar room as backup. The new ones are your working boots now, good leather, solid sole. Agnes Purse nods at you one morning on Long Lane, not warmly, but deliberately. You're recognised. You are, in the informal cartography of Bermondsey street work, part of the landscape. You nod back. Martha passes the apple core back to you one morning at the park gate. You had 2, she had none. And the transaction takes place without a word and with the minimum of eye contact required to accomplish it. She finishes it, puts the core in her pocket. Barrowside's getting crowded, she says. 3 new workers this month. I noticed, you say. Northeast corner is still clear. Gravel Lane to Great Dover Street. I haven't worked it. Try Thursday. She picks up her yoke. It's not Doyle territory. There's a man named Sutherland on Bermondsey New Road. Smaller operation. He pays a penny less than Doyle, but he's less particular about quality, which means your early morning material, the wetter stuff you leave on the street, and goes to him. You stare at her. You've been leaving money on the street, she says. The material you don't take to Doyle, the lower grade, the wetter pieces. Sutherland will take it at 2pence. It costs you nothing to add a second customer. She walks away. You stand at the park gate in the September morning doing the arithmetic. The wet material are the pieces you leave because they don't meet Doyle's standard. Averaged across a week, that might be another penny a day, maybe 2 on good days, maybe 52 more shillings over a year. 52 shillings is more than £2. £2 is more than 2 months' rent. The material was right there, every morning. You were walking past it. What Martha just gave you is not a single morning's route. It is a system, an architecture. The accumulated knowledge of 15 years of working these streets with the precision of someone who understood, long before you arrived, that the margin is thin enough that nothing can be wasted. You visit Sutherland on a Thursday. He runs a small glue operation, not the main Bermondsey leather process, a secondary use of lower grade materials. He buys lower quality pure for a baiting process on inferior grades of leather, cheap shoes, strapping industrial use. He is a thin man with an office that smells of something underneath the usual Bermondsey smell, something sharper and more acrid. He is precise and unsentimental. He looks at the material you bring. This is lower grade, he says. I know, you buy lower grade. 2pence. He states it flatly. This is consistent supply. Same route, same timing. You don't get consistent supply without a relationship. A pause. 2pence halfpenny, he says. Done, you say. A year and a week in London. On the evening of that exact day, sitting on your pallet in the cellar room on Horsley Street with Tom asleep across from you and the candle burning on the table, you count what you have. The coins in the leather pouch, 1 shilling and 3p. This is tonight's surplus. More than a week ago, more than a month ago. The arithmetic has been improving incrementally through the yoke and the boots and Sutherland and the northeast corner, and all the small decisions that compound like interest into something more sustainable than survival. Not comfortable, not secure. The margin is still thin in the way that Bermondsey margins are always thin, the way the margins of all work at this end of the economy are always thin, because thin is structural. But thicker than it was. You put the coins back in the pouch, you lie back, the candle on the table, Tom's breathing. Tomorrow is a working day. The alarm, which is the church bell of St. Mary Magdalene's, which rings at 5:30 and is audible in the cellar room if the wind is right, will come before you are ready for it. The morning will be cool. September cool. The first real suggestion that summer is genuinely over and not just resting. The cobblestones will be damp. Your shoulders will know what to do. You will find Martha at the park gate. Or you won't. You will deliver to Doyle and to Sutherland. You will make the calculation about the northeast corner. You will carry the 2 buckets and walk the route, and do the quality judgment that your eyes make now in 30 seconds that took 20 minutes in your first week. You will earn something, probably close to a shilling, possibly more, and the man who buys the boots on the Strand, the boots in the well-lit window, the boots that began in the chemistry of this bucket and this route and this street, he will not know. He will buckle his boots on a September morning and walk out into London without this crossing his mind. Not because he is cruel, not because he has decided to be ignorant, just because the chain is long and the middle is invisible and the boots are simply boots. That is the shape of the world. It has always been the shape. What changes, what you feel changing lying here in the cellar room at the end of a year, is your position within it. Not your ability to change it. Not your visibility to the people at the other end of the chain. Just your own knowledge of it. You know what you do. You know why it matters. You know the chemistry and the route and the quality hierarchy and the name of the man who designed the building on the hill at Greenwich and the name of the sailor with one arm who told you the chain runs further than you can see. This knowledge does not pay better. It does not improve your boots or warm your room or change Doyle's price. But it is yours. Nobody can take it out of your bucket at the gate. Let the room go quiet now. Let the sounds of Horsley Street be just sounds, not information, not demands on your attention, just the city breathing, the enormous slow breath of it, 500,000 lives exhaled into the September night. The bucket is by the door. The coins are in the pouch. The yoke hangs on the nail beside the door where you put it each evening, the curve of the wood familiar, the hooks worn smooth at the contact points from daily use. Tomorrow the bucket will be full by 10, but that is tomorrow. Right now there is just this, the candle guttering, Tom's breathing deep and even. The September night outside, cooler than August, the first real breath of autumn coming down the river from somewhere north and wide. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a route and a buyer and a second buyer and a skill you did not have a year ago. You have a right shoulder stronger than the left and hands that know the motion of the scraper and eyes that read quality in 30 seconds. You have Martha's route and Richard Holt's observation about the chain and the view from the hill at Greenwich when the morning light was on the dome of St. Paul's and the whole city spread below, like something that required your participation to exist. That is not nothing. In a city that eats so many people alive, that is not nothing. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way the river takes everything. Without drama, without negotiating, just continuously, carrying you forward into what comes next. Let the bucket by the door mean nothing until morning. Let the route go dark in your mind, the streets folding up, Grange Road and Long Lane and the Borough Park and Tanner Street and the gate and Doyle's grey eyes and Martha's voice and the creak of the yoke settling into silence. Let your thoughts slow, the way good work slows you, the way the body, which has been carrying and walking and calculating since before dawn, finally consents to stillness. The candle goes out. The room is dark. Centuries will pass. The tan pits of Bermondsey will be built over. The tanneries will close one by one. Through the century that comes after this one, a synthetic chemistry replaces the ancient biology of your bucket. The leather market on Leather Market Street will become something else. A building for other businesses, people working at desks in rooms where the smell of hides once lived in the walls. The streets will be paved and lit and filled with vehicles that make no sound like a horse. The river will be cleaned, Bazalgette sewers finally doing what they are designed to do, and the great stink will become history. The Dome of Saint. Paul's will still be visible from the south bank, still doing what Wren designed it to do, the geometry of faith and the geometry of navigation in the same stone. And someone, in some comfortable place, 2 centuries from now, will lie down at the end of their day and hear about this. About Bermondsey in 1860. About the streets and the buckets and the tanneries and the chemistry that nobody understood and everybody used for 400 years. About the people whose work made the boots and the harnesses and the navy leather and whose names are in no account of any of it. About a boy named Will Fletcher from Maidstone, Kent, who came to London with 3 shillings and the address of a cousin who had moved to Manchester, and who learned the streets and the routes and the quality hierarchy and the name of the man who designed the building on the hill. About the boots in the window, what they cost, what it actually cost. Let that person rest now too, whatever their day held, whatever it asked of them. It was enough. It is always enough. The same chain runs from those streets all the way to this moment. They just cut the chain in the middle before they show it to you. But it is there. It was always there. And you are part of it. Right now. In this moment. At rest. Let the world fade. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've earned this rest. Take it, and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.